So I'm walking in the streets of Buenos Aires, and a friend of mine is trying to have me imagine a time where children would learn software and would not know what the words cut, paste would mean. I got a little nervous there. It showed in my body right away. So, yes, technology has been encouraging us to dissociate this way for a very long time. And if you can understand this, you can understand why dance has to reinvent itself as culture changes. So here, this quote is on from Scott 0962, is on a piece on the BBC from a think tank, sorry, I'm French, a think tank, and that's evaluating scenarios for human extinction. And I hope you're not going to be too surprised to find technology right at the top of that list. Our relationship to technology as a cause for total human extinction. And if you read Scott's comment, he's very busy living his life, so he doesn't really care. But we use technology quite a lot at a younger and younger age, and you can tell it's very physical here. And we also use all types of design, things that we relate to in movement. So here you can see the mother struggling a little bit to lift that child to get a drink of water. I'm sure that didn't happen like that 300 years ago. So I'm here to yes, I've never gotten that reaction because there's never been anybody. But I'm here to remind us as a group of the importance of thinking and moving developmentally. Neuroscientist and TED Talk presenter and self-described movement chauvinist David Wolpert asserts that we have a brain for one reason and one reason only, and that is to produce and adapt complex movement. And the thought is mirrored by 1950s father of biomechanics, Nikolai Bernstein, that says that any structure that we have right now in our brain is a direct result of us negotiating locomotion. By locomotion, we mean this sort of negotiation of spatial and coordination puzzle, and that we constantly monitor, and that at the same time we solve, but mostly in unconscious ways. Athletes do this all the time. Dancers do this all the time. In fact, she's sitting in the audience here today, this dancer. And then the other thing we know from neuroscience is that our brains aren't done. They aren't done adapting from moment to moment. We used to think there was a deadline. Now we know there's not. So as movers, and I imagine that means all of us, then a question might arise. If there's a relationship in between this brain that's not done and movement that affects the brain, then maybe it'd be important to us to know how to make the best choices possible towards locomotion. And by locomotion, I mean walking, skipping, but I also mean pushing your chair back to reach for your mouse. I also mean any leaning that's going to get your intention manifested, right? So if we're going to start to answer that question, then we're going to have to consider that locomotion is not something we have to relearn every day. While we can impact movement consciously, for the most part, everything is integrated into the whole. Dancers push this system to the limit. Can they learn dance with just their whole system as it is? Normally not. That means that we normally have to open the system tinker with it a little bit, and let it reintegrate itself. Is this difficult? Well, you think about it. For the most part, it's not. And most people would like to learn to dance today. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can teach them. Right. So we'll do an experience. Pay attention to your moving body right now. For the most part, I'm guessing your mind went a little crazy. You start, maybe you had a blank stare, maybe you held your breath, maybe you squeezed some muscle, you moved a shoulder, you tried to do something instead of just being able to naturally pay attention to your movement. That's not any different for dancers, by the way. If you ask them at some point to pay attention specifically to emotion, most likely what you'll get is an interference on the system and not necessarily an improvement. So my job as a dance teacher is to help them create this link in between thinking in activity and their love of moving. I do this with two things. One is developmental movement. My love of development is apparent, maybe. But also the Alexander technique. As a teacher of the Alexander technique, it's a 100-year-old method that an Australian actor put together. Basically, I introduce students to this educational method that allows a person to manage their movement habits in real time. I won't talk too much into it right now, but if you were here earlier, and I'm guessing you were, when we heard the talk about autism, then in 1973, Nicholas Tinbergen, the Nobel Prize winner for biology, spent half of his acceptance speech talking about how he used the Alexander technique to observe autistic children. I thought that was an interesting link. Alexander found a way to direct thinking that would then allow for movement habits to recalibrate themselves, and then that would then turn around to sort of this better thinking, more choices in thinking. It's a little hard to explain right now, but another thing that is important about the Alexander technique is he said that our everyday sensing, so whatever you're sensing now, is most likely faulty. And that if we want to, that we have to address this if we're going to be able to manifest our intentions again. So in the early stages, as we teach ourselves to move, we have to learn to think, feel, and recalibrate our responses moment to moment to allow our head to be supported and to allow to make this step to be able to move forward and attain our goals. At the end of this development, the great athlete is the one that's able to balance this thinking and activity and this reliable sensing. Now, our society, for the most part, does not trust this balance or doesn't give it much credence. For both the toddler and the athlete, there's a thought that there is coaching involved or parenting involved, as if someone else was controlling the system from outside. Or there's sort of this natural, this reference to natural ability, again, or hard work. All of these things sort of don't take into account intelligence. And we might ask ourselves why. It's because we do not consider the whole. Now, the idea of considering the whole is an Alexander idea, but at some point, I was trying to understand this from various perspectives, and my wife brought me this little book called A Theory of Everything. And it's philosopher Ken Wilber, who has designed sort of this graph with 4 quadrants, 2 continuums, one from the individual to the collective, and one from the inner subjective to the outer objective. And you can tell right away that in our society, what I do and what we do, what I wear, I decide to wear a suit, I'm wearing a certain thing, I'm a man, all of these things are very important to us. as opposed to the left side of the quadrant, which is more sort of this subjective experience, ends up interfering with teaching, like we've heard a little bit earlier, where my children's personal experience is being downplayed for an achievement score. And the more we support the right side, then the more the left side pays. But in this case, I'm looking to consider the whole. In dance, the same thing happens. So for example, it's very easy to look at ballet as a form, something objective that if you saw me here in a tutu, you'd be puzzled, but you would know it's ballet. And, right? And then ballet bar, while you might not know what a ballet bar is, if I told you it was a series of exercises that trains a ballet dancer, then you would know pretty much what it does. So why does this matter? Well, it matters to me because, again, it creates a hole for the dancer. And if there's a hole here and there's 4 quadrants, those arrows represent development. And it would be very hard to have development in one quadrant and not have development in the other. So no one's arguing that a dancer does not have a personal, subjective experience. But with the advent of technology, a sort of mechanistic model has grown into the training. And the experience of the dancer has been downplayed for the achievement of sort of this perfect technique. So, then I'm trying to train what? Well, a thinking dancer. And the thinking being embodied thinking, not something that's dissociated or not something that is overpowering the body. What does that mean? So in this case, this dancer, this is 3 version on its way to lifting a leg. So a model would be your Barbie model. I'm sure you've seen a doll or a Barbie. And if you were to have a Barbie right now, you would just lift a leg like straight back like this because the joint has been created by some engineer somewhere that had to deal with plastic and whatnot, and the leg just goes up this way. But this model would be very damaging if a dancer was trying to apply that model. Really, what's happening in lifting a leg to the back is it's like a child that we spiral, and spiraling facilitate lifting the leg. And this spiraling has to be present, even if at the end result would not look like there's spiraling involved. So if you want a thinking dancer, you have to connect them developmentally through the ages of what's happened to that body before, or else they're just trying to disembody themselves. Now, if development is something that happened when we were young and we were done, then we could just like slap our hands, which I can't do with this remote, and be done. And then if you reach in your 70s, you might think it's too late, but obviously Carol here is working hard to try to figure out this 3-dimensionality to her body, and I think she's doing quite well. Development requires that each stage support each other. So if you're seeing this toddler, Owen, walk, then you know he crawled, and you know before that he was able to lift his head off the floor. The walking is supported from the head being able to look up, and the crawling is supporting still a version of the walking. And what's happening in you right now as you're sitting in these seats, all of these stages are there to support you. You're still negotiating, keeping your head balanced to support the sitting, or else you would all sort of collapse in your seat. So the thing to maybe notice about all this is if there is development, then that development is mostly going to happen either unconsciously or consciously. And I don't know about you, but for me, I would prefer for it to be consciously managed, especially if I can manage it without interfering too much. So what does that mean? It means that if we're afraid that a toddler is a little late, and we pick them up by their hands and we carry them around across the room, that might not be so good. The same thing if a toddler is walking and I trip him, thinking I'm going to teach him, what real life is about, that might not be so good. I know, it is funny, and yet, And yet, I care about this because we have a tendency to allow technology to do this to us. So we are not paying attention as to whether technology is supporting our development or retarding our development or forcing our development. An example. Everyone knows what this is. If there had been a thinking dancer in the original team, do you think that the cell phone that you have right now would look like what it looks like? And that we would all be bent over with 2 fingers trying to express ourselves? I doubt that very much. Oh, I backed up because the mouse backed up. Another example is the wheelchair. I work with athletes here at the VA in the spine clinic, and I am always surprised that this chair that is built to help them be active is actually keeping them safe, but not supporting movement that would help them continue to develop. So that means an athlete, someone who's very interested in keeping themselves healthy over time, actually has to struggle with that chair to remain healthy. In this last picture, there's actually nothing going on. She has 2 computers in front of her, and she is mentally involved, but she is physically aware. She's allowing herself for movement to be possible if it needs to be there. If you just looked at it, you would not notice. We most likely would notice the interference if she was collapsed. But since she's not doing very much, she's just present. So my call to arms to you is to involve thinking dancers in design. Help us stop this flow of dissociation. On one side, this mind that's trying to get something done without the body. And allow for the whole to come about. All quadrants, body and mind. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what health is. Thank you.